Tonight, Lady Gaga is not here, and that feels strange, because Lady Gaga is usually everywhere, on stage, on screen, in costume, out of costume, but always intentional. Lady Gaga doesn't simply appear, she performs appearance itself, and that distinction matters. Most people perform roles. Lady Gaga performs identity. Now pause for a moment. Before the music, before the fashion, before the spectacle, there was a decision to be seen differently, not accidentally, deliberately. Lady Gaga didn't stumble into excess. She designed it. Excess became language. In a culture that rewards sameness, she chose exaggeration, and exaggeration forced attention. But attention was never the end goal. Expression was. Now think about performance again. Most performers step on stage to become larger than life. Lady Gaga stepped on stage to become unavoidably human. She just wrapped that humanity in armor. Armor made of sound, of fabric, of persona. Persona is important here, because Lady Gaga didn't hide behind a mask. She built one and invited you to question it. Who is real? The person, or the performance? That question became her brand. Now consider vulnerability. Lady Gaga is vulnerable, but not quietly. She puts vulnerability under a spotlight. Pain becomes choreography. Insecurity becomes art direction. Most people hide their fractures. Lady Gaga amplifies them. That amplification feels brave, but it's also risky. Because when you turn vulnerability into spectacle, you invite interpretation. And interpretation can distort. Now let's talk about control. Lady Gaga appears chaotic, but chaos without control falls apart quickly. She didn't fall apart. She structured chaos. Every outfit, every reinvention, every aesthetic pivot, planned, not to please, but to provoke. Provocation kept her ahead of comfort. Comfort kills creativity. Lady Gaga understood that early, so she stayed uncomfortable, publicly. Now think about fame again. Fame usually smooths people out. It polishes rough edges. Lady Gaga sharpened hers. She refused to be easily consumable, and refusal creates tension. Tension keeps people watching, but tension also exhausts. Now let's talk about exhaustion, because Lady Gaga burned fast. You could feel it. The pace, the reinvention, the constant demand to be more shocking, more expressive, more visible. That pressure doesn't disappear just because you're talented. In fact, talent makes it worse, because expectations rise. And Lady Gaga carried those expectations like a performance obligation. Now consider identity again. Lady Gaga is not Stefani Germanotta, and Stefani Germanotta is not Lady Gaga. But they are not separate either. They overlap, and living in overlap is complicated, because where does the performance end, and where does the person begin? Lady Gaga blurred that line intentionally, but living inside a blur takes energy. Eventually, the body asks for clarity. Now, here's the late-night irony. People thought Lady Gaga was hiding, but she was revealing, just not in the way people expected. She didn't reveal normalcy. She revealed intensity. Intensity is harder to process, but more honest. Now think about gender. Lady Gaga played with it, broke it, reassembled it. She refused to perform femininity in a single way. She expanded it. That expansion made people uncomfortable. Discomfort sparks conversation. Conversation keeps relevance alive. But relevance built on discomfort requires constant recalibration. You can't shock forever. Eventually, shock becomes noise. Now let's talk about reinvention. Lady Gaga reinvented herself again and again. Pop icon, art performance, jazz singer, actress. Each reinvention felt drastic, but they shared a core. Emotional honesty. Even when the costume changed, the emotional intensity stayed. That consistency kept her credible. Now consider silence. Lady Gaga didn't disappear forever, but she did step back, and that step back felt jarring, because we were used to constant spectacle. Silence from someone like her felt like absence, but absence can be healing. Now think about healing. Lady Gaga spoke openly about pain, trauma, mental health, not as branding, but as necessity. She didn't frame vulnerability as weakness. She framed it as survival. That reframing changed how audiences related to her. She was no longer just a performer. She became a mirror. Mirrors are powerful, but they also demand energy. People project onto mirrors, and projection can be heavy. Now let's talk about authority. Lady Gaga has authority without distance. She connects emotionally, but that closeness requires boundaries. Without boundaries, connection turns into depletion. Lady Gaga learned that the hard way. Now here's the important shift. She didn't abandon performance, she refined it. She stopped performing excess and started performing precision. Less noise, more intention. That shift marked maturity, not loss of edge, but control of it. Now pause here. Was Lady Gaga ever just eccentric? Or was eccentricity the language she used to survive attention? Because attention can be violent. It consumes, it interprets, it reshapes. Lady Gaga fought back by shaping herself first. Now let's bring this back to you. Because this isn't just about Lady Gaga, it's about what happens when identity becomes performance, when self-expression becomes expectation, when authenticity itself turns into a job. Lady Gaga lived that reality in public, and she adapted, not by becoming smaller, but by becoming more intentional. So tonight, this isn't about celebrating spectacle, it's about understanding why someone would build armor out of art, and what happens when that armor starts to weigh too much. Because Lady Gaga's story is not about shock, it's about survival through expression, and expression when pushed too far eventually asks for rest. Now let's talk about the cost of expression, because expression is not free. It demands energy, attention, emotional exposure. Lady Gaga paid that cost publicly. While most people protect their inner life, she turned hers into material. Night after night, song after song, that kind of openness builds connection. But connection without limits slowly turns into extraction. People don't just listen anymore. They take meaning, they take comfort. They take pieces of the story and carry them away. Lady Gaga became a container for collective emotion. That role is powerful, but it's also heavy. Now think about burnout. Burnout doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in quietly, through exhaustion that doesn't leave, through joy that feels thinner, through the pressure to keep being on. Lady Gaga felt that pressure early, because when your brand is intensity, rest looks like betrayal. The audience expects more feeling, more honesty, more exposure, but the body eventually asks for something simpler: stability. Now let's talk about control again. In the beginning, Lady Gaga controlled the spectacle. She decided how far it went, but over time, the spectacle began demanding maintenance. Outfits had to escalate, concepts had to shock, moments had to be bigger. At some point, control shifts direction. You're no longer directing the performance, you're servicing it. That's a dangerous pivot. Now consider vulnerability again. Lady Gaga taught the world that vulnerability can be strength, and that lesson mattered. It gave people permission to feel. But vulnerability, when constant, stops being healing. It becomes exposure. Exposure without recovery leads to depletion. Lady Gaga realized this when the pain stopped transforming into art, when it just stayed pain. Now think about silence. Silence came slowly, not as disappearance, but as withdrawal. Lady Gaga stepped back not to escape attention, but to survive it. That silence confused people, because we had learned to expect spectacle. But silence was the most honest response to a system that never stopped asking. Now let's talk about healing. Healing doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't trend. It looks like boundaries, like pacing, like choosing not to explain everything. Lady Gaga began to protect herself in ways she never had before. Less exposure, more intention. She didn't abandon performance, she refined it. Now think about her evolution. The shock faded, not because she lost creativity, but because she gained perspective. Perspective changes priorities. Instead of proving difference, she focused on durability. Instead of overwhelming the audience, she invited them closer, but only when she was ready. Now consider how rare that is. Many artists burn out trying to remain who they were at the height of attention. Lady Gaga allowed herself to change. Change is risky. Audiences resist it, but resisting change is more dangerous. It traps people inside old versions of themselves. Lady Gaga refused that trap. Now let's talk about authenticity again. Authenticity is often misunderstood. It's not saying everything. It's knowing what matters enough to say at all. Lady Gaga's later work feels quieter. But quiet doesn't mean shallow. It means focused. Focused energy lasts longer than explosive bursts. Now think about femininity again. Lady Gaga once challenged it by exaggerating it. Later, she challenged it by grounding it. She showed that strength doesn't require spectacle, that presence doesn't require performance, that you can be powerful without being loud. That evolution mattered, because it offered a different model. Not constant disruption, but intentional expression. Now let's talk about audience responsibility, because Lady Gaga didn't exist alone. We rewarded shock, we amplified excess, we celebrated burnout as dedication, and then acted surprised when the cost became visible. Lady Gaga held up a mirror to that dynamic, and mirrors make people uncomfortable. Now think about identity again. Lady Gaga started as a persona, a deliberate construction, but over time the person behind it needed space to exist without performance. That transition is difficult. When people fall in love with the mask, they resist seeing the face. Lady Gaga navigated that resistance with patience. She didn't destroy the persona, she integrated it. Integration is maturity. It allows the past to exist without controlling the present. Now let's talk about time. Time changes how art is received. What once shocked now feels historical. What once overwhelmed now feels iconic. Lady Gaga's early excess aged into influence. Because influence requires distance. Distance allows re-evaluation. And re-evaluation restores respect. Now think about resilience. Resilience isn't toughness, it's adaptability. Lady Gaga adapted without erasing herself. She slowed down, she recentered, she chose sustainability over intensity. That choice saved her career, but more importantly, it saved her relationship with herself. Now bring this back to you, because this isn't just about Lady Gaga. It's about what happens when expression becomes expectation, when being real turns into a job, when vulnerability becomes currency. Lady Gaga lived that reality in public, and she survived it by learning when to stop performing. Now here's the final late-night thought. Lady Gaga taught us that art can be armor. But armor, if never removed, eventually becomes a cage. True strength is knowing when to wear it and when to set it down. Lady Gaga didn't lose her edge. She learned how to carry it without cutting herself. And that lesson might be the most powerful performance of all.